Jasmine Carter checked her emails while waiting in line at the local coffee shop. Her navy suit and heels showed her success, earned through years of hard work and determination. The line moved slowly as people waited for their morning coffee, but Jasmine didn't mind. She'd already planned her day, including 3 important meetings and a property inspection. "Excuse me, coming through. Important meeting." A white man pushed past other customers, his expensive suit matching his entitled attitude. He moved through the line until he reached Jasmine, then tried stepping around her as if she didn't exist. Jasmine kept her eyes on her phone, ignoring his rudeness. The man cleared his throat loudly, clearly annoyed that she hadn't moved. "I said, excuse me," he repeated, his voice filled with arrogance. "Sir, there's a line here, and we're all waiting," Jasmine said calmly, glancing up from her phone. The man's face changed as he looked at her, his expression turning cold and hostile. "Do you know who I am?" he asked sharply. "I'm Richard Preston, Senior Vice President at Meridian Financial. I have a meeting in 15 minutes, and I don't have time to wait in line with people like you." Other customers watched uncomfortably as Richard continued. "You people always take so long deciding what to order anyway. Just step aside and let those of us with real jobs through." Jasmine felt her heart rate increase, but kept her voice steady. "My order is quite simple, Mr. Preston, and my job is just as real as yours." She turned back to her phone, trying to show him his words couldn't affect her. Richard stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Listen here, I don't think you understand how things work. I'm not asking you to move, I'm telling you to move." His voice carried a threat, and his eyes burned with hatred. Several people in line shifted uneasily, but nobody spoke up. Jasmine could feel their eyes on her, watching to see what would happen next. She straightened her spine, turning to face Richard fully. "Mr. Preston, I understand perfectly how things work. What you don't understand is that your position at Meridian Financial doesn't give you the right to harass people." Her voice remained professional but firm. Richard's face reddened. "Harass? I'm just trying to get my coffee. You're the one causing trouble, playing the victim like you people always do." He pulled out his phone. "Maybe I should call security, have them explain to you how to behave in a professional environment." Jasmine smiled slightly, which seemed to confuse Richard. "Please go ahead and call security. In fact," she pressed a button on her phone, "I already have." 2 security guards entered the coffee shop. Richard smirked, expecting them to remove Jasmine. Instead, they approached him respectfully. "Ms. Carter, is there a problem here?" Richard's smirk vanished. He looked at Jasmine, then the guards, his confidence wavering for the first time. "This man has been harassing me and making racist comments," Jasmine said calmly. "He also seems unaware that this entire building, including this coffee shop, belongs to Carter Industries." The color drained from Richard's face as realization hit him. Jasmine Carter wasn't just another customer. She was his company's landlord. Meridian Financial's offices were in her building. "Ms. Carter, I didn't realize," Richard stammered, his arrogance replaced by fear. "Clearly, you didn't realize many things, Mr. Preston. You didn't realize that the woman you chose to harass owns this building. You didn't realize that your racist behavior was being recorded by security cameras. And you didn't realize that I have a meeting with your CEO this afternoon about renewing your company's lease." Other customers now watched openly, some recording with their phones. Richard stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "I don't want any trouble," he said quickly, backing away. "I'll just go to another coffee shop." "The security team will escort you to your office," Jasmine replied. "I'll be speaking with your HR department about this incident. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment in our buildings." The security guards moved to either side of Richard, who now looked desperate. "Please, Ms. Carter, I didn't mean. It was just a misunderstanding." "No, Mr. Preston, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was racism, plain and simple, and it's time you learned that such behavior has consequences." As the guards led Richard away, other customers began applauding. Someone called out, "You go, girl!" But Jasmine didn't smile. Instead, she felt a deep sadness that such incidents still happened, mixed with determination to use her position to create change. The barista called her forward. "Your usual, Ms. Carter. It's on the house today." "Thank you, but I'll pay," Jasmine replied, "just like everyone else." She handed over her card, ordered her coffee, and waited quietly, checking her phone once more. A young black woman who had watched everything approached her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing up to him, for showing him we're not powerless." Jasmine touched the woman's arm gently. "We never were powerless. Some people just need to learn that the hard way." As Jasmine collected her coffee and headed toward the door, she knew this incident wasn't over. She had meetings to arrange, with Meridian Financial's CEO, with her legal team, and with the building's security. Richard Preston had chosen the wrong person to harass, and she would make sure this became a lesson not just for him, but for anyone who thought they could get away with such behavior. The coffee shop doors closed behind her as she walked toward her office, her head held high. She had fought discrimination before, and she would keep fighting it. Not everyone had the power she did to stand up to racism, but she would use her position to make sure that slowly, steadily, things would change. Jasmine entered her office, immediately calling her assistant. "Sarah, cancel my morning meetings. Something urgent needs handling." She forwarded the security footage from the coffee shop incident, making sure every detail of Richard Preston's behavior was documented. "Get me Meridian Financial's CEO on the line," Jasmine instructed, her voice firm. But before Sarah could act, her phone buzzed. Richard Preston was already trying to damage control the situation. "Ms. Carter, please let me explain," Richard's voice trembled through the speaker. "I've had a stressful week, and I wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Preston, stress doesn't make someone racist. It only reveals what's already there." Jasmine ended the call, but her phone immediately lit up again, this time from Meridian's CEO, James Morrison. "Jasmine, I just heard about the incident. Richard Preston is already claiming it was a misunderstanding, that his words were taken out of context." James sounded worried, perhaps more about his company's lease than the actual incident. "There's no context for racism, James. I have the video footage and multiple witnesses. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Jasmine's words hung in the air. But before James could respond, breaking news alerts flooded her phone. Someone had posted the coffee shop video online. Coffee shop racist was trending, and Meridian Financial's stock was already taking a hit. Jasmine watched as social media exploded with the story. Some defended Richard, claiming he was having a bad day. Others called for his immediate firing. But something felt off: the timing of the video leak, the quick media response. Who had orchestrated this? Her security team reported that Richard Preston had made several calls right after the incident. One number stood out: a local news station. Was he trying to spin the story before it spun out of control? "Miss Carter," Sarah interrupted her thoughts. "Richard Preston's wife is here. She's crying and insisting on speaking with you." Jasmine paused. This wasn't just about one man's racist outburst anymore. What secrets would this incident uncover? How deep did the discrimination run in Meridian Financial? A new email caught her attention. An anonymous tip from someone inside Meridian, claiming Richard's behavior was just the tip of the iceberg. Attached were documents showing a pattern of discrimination in hiring and promotions. Jasmine stood at her office window, watching the city below. She had a choice to make. She could accept Richard's apology, let him face minor consequences, and maintain the status quo. Or she could dig deeper, potentially exposing systemic racism within one of the city's largest financial institutions. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Richard Preston. But this time, it wasn't an apology, it was a threat. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Ms. Carter. Some doors should stay closed." Jasmine smiled. Richard had just made her decision much easier. She pressed her intercom. "Sarah, get me every file we have on Meridian Financial. It's time to clean house." As she began her investigation, one question burned in her mind. How far would Richard Preston go to protect his position? And what secrets was he really trying to hide? The real battle was just beginning, and Jasmine Carter was ready for war. Behind her office door, Mrs. Preston sobbed, but Jasmine noticed something odd in her eyes, not sadness, but calculation. "Please, Miss Carter, our reputation, our lifestyle, we can't lose everything." "Interesting how you're more concerned about lifestyle than addressing your husband's actions," Jasmine replied, studying Mrs. Preston's designer bag and perfectly manicured hands. Just then, Sarah rushed in. "Miss Carter, you need to see this." She handed over her tablet, showing multiple employee complaints against Richard Preston, all buried, all from minority workers. Each case mysteriously disappeared, the employees quietly transferred or let go. Mrs. Preston, did you know about these? Jasmine turned the tablet around. Mrs. Preston's tears suddenly dried, her face hardening. You don't understand our position. Some people just aren't qualified. They cry racism when they can't handle the job. Her mask had slipped, revealing the same prejudice as her husband. Jasmine's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Check Richard Preston's connection to Judge Williams. Follow the money. The pieces started falling into place. Judge Williams had dismissed discrimination cases against Meridian for years. Security, Jasmine called. Please escort Mrs. Preston out. As she left, Mrs. Preston turned. You're making powerful enemies, Ms. Carter. Not everyone appreciates your kind of success. Jasmine immediately called her investigator. I need everything on Richard Preston and Judge Williams. Bank records, meetings, everything. She knew she'd struck a nerve. The Preston's reaction proved it. Her phone rang, James Morrison again. Jasmine, be reasonable. This could damage a lot of people's careers. Maybe we can reach an agreement. Funny how you mention careers now, James, but what about the careers Richard destroyed? The lives he ruined? A notification popped up. Someone had accessed her building's security system, trying to delete footage from the coffee shop incident. Amateur move. She had already secured multiple copies. Sarah entered again. Ms. Carter, Richard Preston just called an emergency board meeting at Meridian, and there's a reporter here, says she has evidence you need to see. The reporter, Lisa Chen, looked determined. Ms. Carter, I've been investigating Meridian Financial for months. Richard Preston isn't just racist. He's been helping hide discriminatory lending practices. But everyone who tried to expose it faced consequences. Jasmine leaned forward. Tell me everything. The morning's coffee shop incident hadn't just exposed one man's racism. It had cracked open the door to something much bigger. How many lives had been affected? How many careers destroyed? And, more importantly, who else was involved? As Jasmine prepared for battle, she knew one thing. There was no turning back now. The real question was, who would stand with her when the truth came out? The anonymous files landed on Jasmine's desk. Loan records, rejected applications, internal memos. A clear pattern emerged. Meridian systematically denied loans to minority business owners, hiding behind fake credit scores and false risk assessments. Ms. Carter, Lisa Chen pointed at the documents. Judge Williams approved these lending practices. Every discrimination lawsuit mysteriously landed in his court. Jasmine's investigator called. Found something interesting. Mrs. Preston owns a shell company that received monthly payments from Meridian. The money trail leads to offshore accounts. A new email arrived from Richard Preston. Last chance, Ms. Carter. Walk away. Some people find success. Others find accidents. Jasmine smiled. He just made this personal. She forwarded the threat to her lawyers, then opened her laptop. Years of business experience had taught her to keep receipts. Sarah rushed in. Meridian's board meeting ended. They're standing behind Preston, but 3 board members resigned in protest. Jasmine's phone lit up with a message from one resigned board member. I have proof. Preston and Williams aren't working alone. There's a network. The elevator dinged. James Morrison stormed in, face red. You're destroying decades of business relationships. We can offer you a better lease deal, more properties. You're trying to bribe me while defending discrimination? Bold move, James. Jasmine pressed record on her phone. Tell me, how long have you known about Preston's activities? Morrison's face changed. He knew he'd walked into a trap. You don't understand the bigger picture. Some traditions, some systems, they're too big to change. Watch me, Jasmine replied. Her security team reported unusual activity outside. Unmarked cars, men in suits, classic intimidation tactics. But they didn't know Jasmine had already secured every document, every video, every piece of evidence. Lisa Chen looked through more files. Ms. Carter, these rejected loans, they all went to a specific company afterward. Guess who owns it? Let me guess. Mrs. Preston's shell company? Exactly. They denied legitimate applications to force desperate business owners into predatory loans. Jasmine stood up. Time to end this. Sarah, call a press conference. Send everything to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and get me Governor Thompson's office. The real question remained, how high did this corruption go? And who would fall when the truth came out? Morrison turned to leave but stopped. You're playing a dangerous game, Jasmine. No, James, I'm changing the rules. Jasmine picked up her phone. It's time everyone learned that karma has an address. And today, it's my office. Governor Thompson's office replied immediately, not with support, but with pressure. Ms. Carter, these allegations could destabilize our state's financial sector. Consider the bigger picture. Interesting, Jasmine mused. The same phrase James Morrison used. She forwarded the governor's message to Lisa Chen. Another piece of the puzzle. Her phone buzzed, Judge Williams himself. Ms. Carter, let's discuss this privately. Your father and I were good friends. Were you? Strange he never mentioned you. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Her father's mysterious car accident 5 years ago suddenly felt less accidental. An email arrived from an encrypted address. Your father found the same network. Don't trust Thompson. Attached were photos. The governor at private meetings with Williams, Preston, and faces she didn't recognize. Sarah, get me everything on my father's last case. Jasmine's hands shook slightly. And contact every minority business owner rejected by Meridian. Lisa Chen gasped at her laptop. The shell company's transactions. They matched the dates of your father's accident. Suddenly, the building's power cut out. Emergency lights flickered on. Ms. Carter, building security's been breached, her phone crackled. They're heading to the server room. Too late, Jasmine smiled. Everything's already backed up off-site. She'd learned from her father's mistakes. Her phone lit up with news alerts. Breaking, FBI raids Meridian Financial. Judge Williams resigns unexpectedly. Governor Thompson cancels all appearances. Richard Preston's final message flashed, "You're just like your father, too stubborn to know when to stop." No, Jasmine replied. I'm smarter. I learned to record everything. She attached his coffee shop rant, showing him exactly what started his downfall. A new voice message. Ms. Carter, FBI Special Agent Howard, we need to talk about your father's case. Jasmine looked at the city skyline, the same view her father had before they silenced him. But this time, the truth wouldn't stay buried. Sarah, send everything to the media, all of it. Jasmine picked up her phone. Time to finish what my father started. The question wasn't just about racism anymore. How many other lives had this network destroyed? And who else would fall before the truth came out? FBI Agent Howard spread photos across Jasmine's desk. Your father wasn't investigating loan discrimination. He found a nationwide network targeting minority businesses for hostile takeovers. The shell companies, Jasmine started, weren't just Preston's. Every major city has a Preston, forcing minority businesses into bad loans, then swooping in to buy them cheap. Sarah interrupted. Ms. Carter, Richard Preston was just found unconscious in his office. But there's more. His wife is missing and the shell company accounts are empty. Jasmine's phone chimed. Mrs. Preston. You think Richard was in charge? I built this network. He was just the face. Good luck finding me or the money. News alerts exploded. Judge Williams found dead. Governor Thompson resigns amid corruption allegations. Minority business owners come forward with decades of evidence. Agent Howard leaned forward. Mrs. Preston was your father's real target. She orchestrated everything, including his accident. Lisa Chen rushed in. Found something huge. The network isn't just about loans. They're buying entire city blocks, forcing out minority communities. It's organized gentrification. Jasmine's security chief called. Ma'am, we traced Mrs. Preston's last location. You won't believe where she's heading. Let me guess. Jasmine stood up. My father's old office. Yes, but why? Because that's where he hid the real evidence. Jasmine grabbed her keys. Time to finish this. Agent Howard stopped her. It's a trap. Of course it is, Jasmine smiled. But she doesn't know I found my father's safe last year. The contents are already with the FBI. Her phone buzzed one last time, an unknown number. Your father was right about the network, but wrong about how high it goes. Be careful who you trust. The question remained. Would the truth die with Mrs. Preston? Or would Jasmine finally expose how deep this corruption really went? Jasmine arrived at her father's old office, FBI agents hidden nearby. Mrs. Preston stood at the window, poised and confident despite being cornered. Figured it out finally? Mrs. Preston smiled. Your father's accident, Richard's racism, the coffee shop, all planned. We needed you to react, to feel powerful, while we cleared the real evidence. You mean these? Jasmine held up a USB drive. Dad's original files? He mailed them to me the day before his accident. Insurance, he called it. Mrs. Preston's smile faltered. Those files died with him. Number they lived through me. Every transaction, every forced closure, every accident, all documented. But you helped fill in the missing pieces today. Sirens wailed outside. Mrs. Preston laughed. You think arrests will stop this? The network's too big. We own judges, governors, and presidential candidates. Jasmine played a recording, Mrs. Preston detailing payments to a leading candidate. Dad didn't just document local corruption. He found the national pipeline. FBI agents entered as Mrs. Preston's composure cracked. Your coffee shop victory was small. We'll win the war. No, Jasmine approached her. That coffee shop was your first loss. This ? This is your last stand. Breaking news flooded screens nationwide. Massive FBI raids across 12 states. Presidential candidate withdraws. Thousands of minority business loans under review. 1 month later, Jasmine stood in the coffee shop, now a symbol of change. The barista called out, "The usual, Ms. Carter." Her phone showed the headlines. Mrs. Preston pleads guilty. Historic compensation for discriminated businesses. New anti-discrimination laws passed. A young black entrepreneur approached. Thank you. Your father would be proud. Jasmine smiled, remembering it all started with one man's racism and one woman's refusal to stay quiet. The fight's not over, she said, but at least now it's a fair one. The final question wasn't about who won or lost. It was about how many lives would change now that the truth was finally free. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments. And sometimes a simple cup of coffee can change the world.